The number 3 city on this list leads the entire nation in GDP growth, with population surging and billions in new investment. The number 1 city just lost 12,000 residents in 4 years and can't guarantee hospitals will have water pressure. Both are getting ruined, just in completely opposite ways. And starting at number 6, we're counting down the southern towns that got ruined and how the South broke itself in the process. Number 6, Gatlinburg, Tennessee. Gatlinburg has a permanent population of about 3,500 people. On a busy weekend, the town swells to over 40,000. That's more than 10 times its actual size. And this happens regularly throughout the year because Gatlinburg sits at the entrance to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, the most visited national park in the entire United States. Over 12 million people visit the Smokies annually. Most of them pass through Gatlinburg. Park visitors spent more than $2 billion in nearby communities in 2024, with total economic output approaching $2.86 billion, supporting over 20,000 jobs in gateway towns. For a place with fewer than 4,000 permanent residents, that economic impact is staggering. Except, when your town exists primarily as a pit stop for tourists, you're not really a town anymore. You're a service station. During peak season, locals avoid their own downtown because the traffic congestion makes it functionally unusable. Parking becomes impossible. Wait times just to move down the main street stretch into hours. And the jobs that tourism creates? They're mostly hospitality and retail, seasonal and low-paying, offering nothing close to economic stability. The average tourism worker in Gatlinburg makes significantly less than workers in healthcare or education in nearby cities. And those jobs disappear entirely in the off-season. What you end up with is a town that looks successful on paper, but feels hollow in practice. A place optimized entirely for people passing through, where permanent residents become an afterthought in their own community. Which brings us to what happens when you take that model and scale it up. Number 5, Asheville, North Carolina. Asheville is Gatlinburg's bigger, more sophisticated cousin. And it's experiencing the same problems, just amplified. In 2023, Buncombe County welcomed 13.9 million visitors who spent roughly $3 billion. Tourism now represents 20% of the entire county's economic output. It supports 29,000 jobs, roughly 1 in every 7 positions in the area. On an average day, there's 1 out-of-town visitor for every 7 residents. Think about what that ratio does to a place. 1/7 of everyone you encounter on any given day doesn't live there. They're not invested in the community. They're extracting an experience and leaving. And Asheville has rebuilt itself to accommodate them. Historic neighborhoods now host breweries and boutiques that might have failed without tourist dollars. The industry generates $265 million in state and local taxes, which helps offset property taxes for residents. By traditional economic measures, this is success. But here's what those measures don't capture. Short-term rentals and second homes have consumed housing stock that locals desperately need. Rents have climbed beyond what service workers can afford, and the entire economy has become catastrophically dependent on visitor spending continuing indefinitely. In 2024, Buncombe County reported an 11% drop in visitor spending, partly due to weather events and slower travel demand. One bad season, and the economic foundation cracks. This is what happens when you build a city around an industry that can evaporate overnight. Tourism doesn't create resilience. It creates fragility disguised as prosperity. And if you think that's bad, wait until you add environmental catastrophe to the mix. Number 4, Charleston, South Carolina. Charleston has everything Asheville has: tourism success, job creation, tax revenue, plus something extra. It's sinking. The city welcomed 7.9 million visitors in 2024, generating $14 billion in economic impact. The tourism sector employed 54,900 people, the highest number on record. Those are incredible numbers. But Charleston sits on low-lying coastal land, increasingly vulnerable to flooding and sea level rise. Major flood events have become routine, requiring hundreds of millions in mitigation efforts. And yet, high-end real estate prices keep rising. Average home prices have climbed to the mid-$500,000. Rents regularly exceed $2,700 a month, well beyond what typical local incomes can support. Over 9,000 properties operate as short-term rentals, converting permanent housing into tourist accommodations. So, Charleston faces a compound crisis. Housing costs are pricing out workers. Tourism is consuming residential neighborhoods, and the city is literally flooding with increasing frequency. But investment keeps flowing into vulnerable coastal real estate because the market operates on short-term profit incentives, not long-term sustainability. This creates a surreal dynamic where Charleston is simultaneously thriving economically and approaching environmental catastrophe. The question isn't whether this model is sustainable. It obviously isn't. The question is what happens when reality catches up. But at least Charleston's problems stem from being too successful, too desirable. The next city on this list is getting destroyed by the exact same forces, just without the excuse of environmental vulnerability. Number 3. Austin, Texas. Austin leads the entire nation in GDP growth. The city's population increased 5.1% between 2021 and 2023. Housing production hit 9.4%, among the highest rates in the country. South by Southwest and Austin city limits bring global attention and hundreds of millions in revenue. Tech giants and startups have transformed the city into a major economic hub. By every conventional measure, Austin is winning. Until you try to actually live there. Median home prices now exceed $500,000. Rents in desirable areas top $1,500 monthly. Only 12% of residents use public transit, leaving everyone else dependent on cars and stuck in traffic on infrastructure that hasn't remotely kept pace with population growth. And the culture that made Austin weird and attractive, it's being systematically displaced by the people who moved there because of it. This is the core paradox of successful southern cities right now. Growth destroys the exact qualities that drove the growth in the first place. The musicians, artists, and independent business owners who created Austin's identity can no longer afford to live there. They're being replaced by remote workers with big city salaries who are attracted to a cultural scene they're simultaneously destroying through their presence. Austin hasn't collapsed. It's transformed into something unrecognizable to the people who built it, which is kind of its own ruin. And here's where the list takes a turn, because the next two cities aren't being destroyed by success. They're being destroyed by failure. Complete, systemic, generational failure. Number 2. Monroe, Louisiana. Monroe, Louisiana is the poorest metropolitan area in the United States. Not the poorest city, the poorest metro. Approximately 40% of the Monroe metro area lives below the poverty line, the highest rate of any major U.S. metro area. The median household income is $30,438, roughly 60% of the national median. And here's the part that makes this permanent. 54.1% of children under 18 live in poverty, more than half, meaning the majority of Monroe's children are growing up in conditions that virtually guaranteed continued poverty into adulthood. Monroe's decline stems from agricultural collapse and failed economic transition. In the early 20th century, the city boomed when Joseph Beidenhardt, the first bottler of Coca-Cola, moved operations there in 1913. Delta Airlines was founded in Monroe in the 1920s to pioneer crop dusting against the boll weevil epidemic. The city had momentum, prestige, economic diversification. But when Delta expanded and relocated to Atlanta in 1941, Monroe lost a major employer and its claim to significance. Agricultural mechanization eliminated most remaining jobs, and the city never recovered. Today, Monroe's top employers are the school board, a telecom company, a hospital, and Walmart. There's no major manufacturing facility, no corporate headquarters, nothing anchoring the economy or providing pathways out of poverty. The city hasn't collapsed into visible ruins. The water system functions, buildings still stand, people go to work. But Monroe represents something arguably worse than dramatic collapse. A functioning city where people work regular jobs and still cannot afford food, housing, healthcare, childcare, or transportation. It's economic failure without the infrastructure catastrophe that might attract federal attention or aid. Just quiet, grinding poverty against tens of thousands of residents with no mechanism for change and no hope of intervention. Monroe is what happens when a city becomes economically obsolete and no one with power cares enough to help. But as bad as Monroe is, at least the water works. At least the basic infrastructure functions. The number 1 city on this list can't even guarantee that. Number 1. Jackson, Mississippi. Jackson, Mississippi represents every type of urban failure simultaneously. The state capital has lost 1/3 of its population since 1980, dropping from over 200,000 to under 150,000. Between 2020 and 2024 alone, just 4 years, the city lost 12,000 residents. That's the largest per capita decline of any major American city. 24% of residents live in poverty, with median household income around $35,000. But Jackson's collapse isn't just economic. It's infrastructural, political, racial, and environmental. The city is now 80% black, the result of massive white flight between 1990 and 2010. Between 1990 and 2000 alone, nearly 35,000 white residents fled Jackson. From 2000 to 2010, another 19,485 white residents left, even as 7,976 black residents moved in. Most fled to wealthy suburban countries like Madison and Rankin, which have doubled and tripled in population since 1990. This wasn't organic demographic change. It was deliberate exodus, and it stripped Jackson of its tax base. As affluent residents left, property values collapsed, public services deteriorated, and the remaining residents, disproportionately black and poor, inherited a city that could no longer function. Jackson now has 2,500 abandoned homes. The city contains over 1/4 of all abandoned properties in Mississippi. Both historic black business districts have closed. And then there's the water. In August 2022, the Pearl River flooded, overwhelming the O.B. Curtis Water Treatment Plant. 160,000 residents were left without safe drinking water for weeks. Faucets dispensed brown, contaminated water unsafe for drinking, cooking, or bathing. But this wasn't a natural disaster. It was the inevitable result of century-old infrastructure that the city cannot afford to repair and the state refuses to adequately fund. Jackson's water system includes over 112 miles of unlined cast iron pipes. Some are over 100 years old. The system loses pressure 5 to 6 times daily. Since 2016, the city has issued boil water notices over 750 times. 750 times in 8 years. And it gets worse. In 2010, Jackson hired Siemens to install advanced water meters, promising increased revenue to fund infrastructure repairs. Siemens delivered malfunctioning meters and incorrect bills. After refunding $90 million in overcharges, Jackson was left with $450 million in lost revenue and deteriorating pipes. The state has identified $600 million in needed repairs. But with a budget chronically underfunded by the Republican state government, Jackson cannot afford the work. So the state capitol exists in a bizarre dystopia. Hospitals and fire stations cannot guarantee water pressure. Residents choose between paying for water or food. Children grow up in a city that looks post-apocalyptic. Jackson represents the complete failure of every system that's supposed to keep a city functional. Economic development, infrastructure maintenance, political representation, corporate accountability, and basic government responsibility. It's not just the worst city on this list. It's a case study in what happens when a place gets abandoned by everyone with the power to help. If you're from one of these cities, or you've watched this happen somewhere else, drop a comment and let me know what I missed. What does it actually feel like living through this? And if you want to see more breakdowns like this, cities that are changing in ways the statistics don't capture, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.